The desert held its breath before sunrise, that thin hour when the world does not yet know which way the day will turn. The canyon walls were the color of old blood, and the creek at the bottom was nothing more than a whisper under stone. A campfire shivered in its ring of rocks, licking at mesquite twigs, throwing shadows that reached and then retreated like hands thinking better of themselves. In that restless light the woman sat with her back to a cottonwood, wrists bound in rawhide that bit deeper each time she shifted. She kept very still. Stillness had become her only country. They had taken her name first, then her horse, then everything that felt like it belonged to her life. She wore dust in the seams of her clothes and a purple bloom at her temple where a rifle, but had spoken harder truth than any word. When the outlaws drank, they called her merchandise or the girl, as if the right word could drain her of personhood faster than thirst. She did not answer to any of it. Her lips moved only for the smallest prayers, fragments of verses her mother had sung in a kitchen that smelled of coffee and fried bread, in a house where mourning had been a gentle thing. She told those prayers to the cottonwood bark and the unseen sky, as if the canyon itself could keep a secret for a few more minutes. They would sell her at sunrise. That was the plan as casually agreed upon as the time to break camp. The leader had said in a voice like a spade striking stone, plain, inevitable. When the rim catches fire, he'd told his men, pointing to the eastern lip where light would gather, we ride. By'll be waiting at the old stage stop. He wore a black hat sweat warped at the brim and a vest dark with the prints of other people's lives. His jaw carried a white scar from ear to chin, raised like chalk under old leather, and when he smiled it never reached his eyes. They called him Rafe Cutter, and the name fit the shape of him. Rafe's men sprawled around the fire and near the mule picket line, their bodies piled on blankets and saddle-rolled jackets, boots out toward the heat. There was Pike with a broken nose that had never learned a straight of it again, and Shay with a laugh too high and quick for a man who had seen winter. There was Lanky Wit, who twirled his colt from boredom the way a child twirls a ribbon, and Sowers, who stank of old whiskey even when he was sober. The one they all deferred to second was Hargrove, heavy through the shoulders, a man whose shirts never seemed to fit. He wore 6-point star spurs that clinked when he moved, a cruel little music. They had come together like birds in a coat, no plan but greed, no law but themselves. The land had learned them. In the last 2 months, a rancher's cattle had gone missing in numbers you could not forget in church. A store safe had given up its treasures in the night, and the storekeeper had been found in the morning with his hands folded across his chest by someone who had never learned tenderness properly. A freight driver with his throat nicked just enough to make him tell. Rafe's crew had slipped through all of it like coyotes in windbreak scrub, leaving only rumors and boot tracks so carefully placed you might think they wanted to be followed by men who would never catch up. They owned dusk, and the canyon trails, and fear along the river road. When you said their names, you glanced at the door. They slept now in drifting fits, some with hats tipped forward, some with their mouths open to catch dreams that would sour in daylight. The ones on watch whispered, voices frayed by sleeplessness. The woman listened to them because listening was all she had left that did not hurt. They talked about the buyer, a mining foreman in Yuma, or a house on a back street in Tucson where girls forgot what streets were made for. They argued about price like men haggling over a mule too old for hills. 200 in coin, Shay said, trying to make it sound like a miracle. 250 and the foreman tosses us a keg. Pike countered, always one to sweeten a deal in his mind. Rafe, cleaning his fingernails with the tip of a knife, watched the eastern sky for signs of change. Her stomach ached, a slow hollow that had become familiar, and her tongue was thick from going too long without water they would not give. She swallowed the taste of rope and smoke in quiet panic. If she looked at the horizon, she could pretend she was simply waiting for a day to begin on the farm she had tended with her brother after their father died, just chores and sun and a wind that scrubbed everything clean. She could see the fence line they had repaired one board at a time, his hands raw where the wire bit, hear the creek running full enough in spring to make a song of its own. She could feel the bay mare's breath on her sleeve as she slipped her a heel of cornbread stolen from the pan with a laugh. Once, she had believed that if you woke early enough, you could catch God placing the light in the hills with careful fingers. That had been before men like these had taken up residence in the corners of the map where law did not walk. Moonlight had fallen away, and the stars thinned until a few stubborn ones seemed nailed to the dark. The cold was deep, the kind that gets into joints and refuses to leave. Every time she shifted against the cottonwood, the rawhide cut, and she bit back any sound. She had learned, in the hour since her capture, that sound invited attention, and attention was a thing these men rationed only in cruelty or sport. Her knees were drawn up, ankles bound loosely enough that running would tempt and fail. Her breath made a pale ghost in the light from the embers. She counted those ghosts to still her heart. Pike, restless and mean in that sly way of his, rose and wandered to her tree. The fire put a red coin in his eye as he tipped his head, studying her like a horse he hadn't decided to buy. "You got quiet down to an art," he said, voice friendly as a rattlesnake. "Wait till we get you to town. Someone will make you talk proper for coin." He squatted and touched the hem of her skirt with 2 fingers, not really needing to touch but taking the liberty because men like him always did. She flinched only inward. He smiled. "See, they always do." "Leave her," Rafe called without looking. "Don't bruise the price." Pike stood. The woman did not bless Rafe for that command. Mercy given because money asked for it did not deserve any name but trade. Wit, bored with his own shadow and too young to know what he should fear, tossed a pebble at the tin cup by the fire and whooped when it clanged. She told him to hush in a shout that defeated the purpose, and Sowers cursed at them both, rolling over, pulling his saddle up as if to sleep under a different sky. Hargrove paced the edge of camp, his spurs marking his circuit. When he passed the mule line, the animals shifted and snorted, the whites of their eyes flashing. "They smell dawn," he told Rafe, as if he were a reader of omens and not just a man with noisy boots. "Or riders," Rafe said, though there was no alarm in it, only that lazy confidence shared by men who had not had to run properly in too long. He flicked a glance at the ridge. "Sun's coming. We'll not be late." He came on a dun mare with a slow, competent gait, the sort of horse that saved its sprint for when it mattered. Dust made a shawl behind him and then fell, and in the new light the canyon unrolled around him as if rising to meet his pace. He rode straight down the open without spurs or noise, a bundle wrapped in canvas tied across the saddle horn and a canteen hanging soft against the mare's shoulder. No rifle under his leg, no pistol showing, only a rope coiled like a sleeping snake and the quiet patience of a man who had spent more mornings with cattle than with men. The sun took hold of the rim and poured gold into the creek's thread, into the cottonwood leaves, into the lines along his face. He looked weathered the way a barn looks weathered, still standing because it knows how to welcome wind. The horses in Rafe Cutter's camp made the first greeting, heads up, ears forward, a shiver running through hide. The men followed, some halfway through a curse, some with hats in their hands as if they had been about to put them on and forgot how. Pike's jaw went sideways as if chewing a question. Wit's colt stopped its lazy twirl. Hargrove's spurs answered their own music. Rafe slid the gold watch back into his vest and tipped his chin as the rider came within a stone's throw and drew the mare to a halt with pressure a boy could have missed. "Morning," the men said, like the word had come to him first and the day after. His voice was low and level, a freight wagon rolling over plank bridge. He swung a leg down and stepped off, boots scuffing dust that rose, and then admitted it had no business clinging to him. He untied the canvas bundle and set it in the crook of his arm, reached to unhook the canteen with the other hand. When he looked at them it was without challenge and without apology. There was a white seam at the corner of his mouth that ran up into his cheekbone, old and tidy like a stitch carefully done long ago. His eyes were pale as worn denim and held a kind of steadiness that made Noise think twice before rushing into the space between people. "You lost a church picnic," Shay said, laughing too quickly at his own words. "We got no choir here." The moon glanced at the fire, then at the woman with her wrists bound to the cottonwood. His gaze landed on her with the gentleness of a palm pressed over lamp glass. He lifted the canteen a fraction. "First for her," he said. Rafe moved forward 1/2 step, the way a rattlesnake does when it wants courtesy. "You step into a man's camp with a water gift and no ask." He smiled without changing his eyes. "You got a mistake to fix." "I brought bread and coffee," the man said. He set the bundle on a flat rock near the coals and opened it. Steam slipped out, carrying the honest smell the woman had caught on the wind, fresh loaves browned hard on top, wrapped in clean cloth, and a lidded tin heavy with beans thickened on last night's fire, and a small twist of salt. He laid out a paper of jerky, a handful of dried apples, a cone of sugar sealed in blue paper for the coffee grounds. "There's enough for all. I came early so no one would have to watch another minute." Pike barked out a grin. Listen to him talk like a deacon. He nudged Wit. "Maybe he'll say grace over us and we'll be clean." Wit's smile found itself again. "What you carrying that's worth a girl?" He flicked his colt toward the woman as if pointing with iron was a joke between old friends. "You trading bread for flesh?" The man's jaw worked once as if remembering what it was to bite back a thing. "No," he said. I'm not trading. I'm asking. And I'm telling. He looked to the woman again, then returned his attention to the man, as if both were part of the same sentence. I'm here for her. I'll walk her out. Silence tried to land, and Rafe shooed away with a soft chuckle. You left out the part where you show coin. This ain't a charity breakfast. He lifted the edge of the cloth and pinched a crust, brought it to his nose, and let a hum slip through his teeth despite himself. Smells like a woman's kitchen. A good oven, the man said. Brick set in clay. I build it myself. The flour's from Bennington's mill 2 valleys over. Coffee strong. The beans could stand a pinch more time if you want them to go to gravy. He weighed the canteen in his palm and looked at Rafe with that same level patience. She drinks first. Hargrove shifted so his spurs spoke. You think you set terms here, cowman? I think if a man can't spare a swallow of water for a bound woman at daybreak, he's naming himself in a way he won't enjoy the taste of later, the man said. He turned the canteen so the light flashed on the brass cap. And I think you ain't hungry enough yet to know what you're refusing. Pike sauntered closer, letting his boot scuff to add inches to his height. Look at that, boys. He's not even wearing a sidearm. You come to a sale unarmed. You come to die easy. He crooked a finger at the woman without taking his eyes off the stranger. You hear that? A gentleman. The man's gaze flicked, weighing Pike like a fence post that might rot in the next storm. He didn't answer the mockery. He stepped to the cottonwood, each movement unrushed and exact in a way that made muscle tighten in men who knew what precision could hide. Rafe's hand rose, palm out, and the men stopped at that line, then set the canteen on the ground and rolled it gently with his boot toe until it rested against the woman's shoe. If you want to make a law of denying, he said to Rafe, you'll have to do it out loud in front of your men. She looked at him in that instant and saw the thing she had not dared ask for since her brother rode away, not rescue, which is loud and breaks bones in its hurry, but a steadiness that made the canyon seem suddenly like a room that might be warmed. He did not look at her like a prize or a pity. He looked like a man who had already counted the cost and laid it on a table in his kitchen and decided to pay. Rafe waved the air as if clearing smoke. Let her drink. What harm is there in a mouthful? He looked amused with himself for the mercy. She went to lift the canteen by its strap and held it for the woman like a man practicing kindness he doesn't understand how to hold. She sipped. The water was cool and clean, and it ran through her as if her veins had been dust roads waiting for rain. She bit the inside of her cheek so the sound she wanted to make wouldn't happen in front of these men. There, Rafe said. We generous. Now we talk price. He turned back to the stranger. You plan on paying with breakfast and opinion? Because I've had both before for free. The man's scar made a small crescent when he smiled. I plan on paying with time. He glanced at the rising rim. Yours. Mine. All of ours. Time spent doing something we can live with when the day turns down. He held Rafe's eyes long enough for Hargrove to shift again, uneasy. I don't have gold. I do have resolve. And I have more men watching you than you can count. He let the last sentence hang like a card shadow before pushing it over with a breath. Not with guns. With eyes. With names of what you've done carried to places that make long memories. Sour spat. Who's this preacher? Name, Rafe said, as if it mattered only because it was a habit with him. You got one. Gideon Cole, the man said, simple as bread. It went around the circle of men like a breeze tries a stand of grass, nothing at first, then a ripple, then a lay-flat hush. Wood dropped his colt and caught it badly, a clumsy second later. Hargrove's face did a slow rearranging as if the bones under it had read a note and wanted to object. Pike's grin at a snag and tore. Cole, Hargrove said, tasting the word. From where? Dry Willow now, Gideon said. A small running there. 40 head in spring, 73 now. A creek that keeps to itself, a clabbered house, 2 milk cows that don't know how to forgive a man for waking late. He paused. Other places before that. The moment broke like glass dropped in a church. Pike lunged first, grinning with the reckless joy of a boy who had never learned to fear consequences. His pistol cleared leather, and the canyon seemed to inhale. Gideon did not reach for a weapon. Instead, his hand closed on the coffee kettle, and with one fluid motion he swung it in an arc-boiling liquid sprayed into Pike's face. The outlaw screamed, staggered back, clutching at his eyes. In the confusion, Gideon's other hand darted to the colt that Wood had fumbled earlier and left too close at hand. Steel settled into his palm like it had been waiting for him all along. The canyon exploded. Gunfire cracked against the walls, reverberating like thunder trapped in stone. Wit drew and fired wild, but Gideon was already moving, low and sideways, the bullet cutting air where his chest had been a breath ago. He rolled behind a flat rock where his bread still steamed and came up steady. One shot rang from his Colt, deliberate, measured. Wit's revolver spun from his hand, his fingers flayed open by the impact, and the boy dropped to his knees cursing and clutching blood. Chaos spun the camp. Horses screamed and jerked against their lines, eyes rolling white. Dust surged up in clouds as boots scrambled and spurs cut earth. The woman pressed herself to the cottonwood, the bark digging into her bruised back, her heart drumming louder than the rifles. Rafe Cutter's smile was gone, his scar gone pale against his skin. He barked orders, flank him. Take him wide. But already Gideon was shifting the canyon into his ally. He decked into the smoke of a fire, let it swallow him, and when Sowers charged through with a blade raised high, Gideon was waiting. A twist, a boot planted in Sowers' knee, and the men fell with a howl, knife skittering across the dirt. Gideon's pistol barrel cracked against the outlaw's temple, silencing him in a single brutal note. He did not linger. He moved like a man who had memorized violence and now spent it sparingly, each strike the exact measure of necessity. Hargrove came next, steady and grim, his spurs clinking like a death toll. He raised his rifle, sighted carefully, but Gideon vanished behind the mule line. He slapped the nearest animal's flank, and the beast surged, rope snapping, hooves tearing the dust into storm. The mules plowed between them, a wall of chaos that sent Hargrove stumbling sideways. Gideon rose behind him, Colt level, and spoke low enough for only Hargrove to hear. Walk away. For a heartbeat it seemed the bigman might. But pride is a chain as binding as any rope. Hargrove spun, rifle half-raised. Gideon's shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Now the canyon was deaf with echoes, the air choked by powder and dust. Shay fired from behind a boulder, his laugh sharp and desperate, the high note of a man cracking under fear. Bullets chipped stone near Gideon's ear. He crouched, lifted a handful of gravel, and hurled it into the air above Shay's cover. Instinct made the outlaw flinch and look up, exposing his shoulder for a breath. Gideon's shot took him clean, spinning him flat on his back where his laugh ended in silence. Rafe Cutter stood alone now, rifle braced, his eyes narrow slits of fury. The leader's voice cut through the ringing canyon. You can kill boys, Baker. Let's see you finish 'em in. Gideon straightened from cover, dust clinging to his sweat-damp shirt, the scar at his mouth pulled tight. He looked at Rafe without triumph, without hunger, only with the weariness of a man who has bled through this kind of morning too many times. You've been finished a long time, Rafe, he said. Rafe fired. The crack lit the canyon like lightning. Gideon was already moving, diving toward the cottonwood, rolling across the dirt. He came up to one knee, Colt steady in both hands. His shot answered like a gavel. Rafe's rifle wavered, fell, his body collapsing after it, dust rising to claim him. The canyon held its breath again. Silence returned, broken only by the frightened stamping of horses and the distant cry of a hawk that had circled since dawn. Smoke thinned, drifting away on the morning wind. The fire popped, sending up sparks that fell harmless now. One by one, the groans of the fallen faded into stillness. Gideon lowered the Colt. For a moment he stared at it, the old weight familiar, hated, necessary. He turned it in his hand and then slid it into his belt as if ashamed to be seen with it too long. His eyes closed briefly, a scar deeper than flesh shadowing his face. The woman dared to breathe. Gideon walked to her, each step slow, deliberate, the adrenaline leaving his limbs heavy. He pulled his knife from his boot and cut the rawhide binding her wrists. The rope fell away, blood rising in angry welts on her skin. He caught her hands gently, rubbing them to coax life back into her fingers. You're free now, he said, voice soft, worn at the edges. Her eyes lifted to his, searching, disbelieving. Why? He looked past her at the canyon walls, at the dust settling over the men who had thought themselves lords of the morning. Because no one should be sold with the sunrise, he said. Not while I still have eyes to see it. The eastern rim blazed fully now, sunlight spilling like fire across the land. It touched her face, gilding the bruise on her temple, turning her tears into jewels. She stood straighter, shoulders unbowed for the first time since her capture. She breathed in the dawn like it belonged to her again. Together they walked through the ruin of camp, past the scattered bread and the tin of beans cooling in its ash. Horses whickered nervously, but when Gideon untied the dun mare, she calmed beneath his hand. He lifted the woman onto the saddle as if she were made of something fragile and sacred, then swung up behind her, steadying her with an arm that carried both strength and caution. They rode out of the canyon slowly, leaving behind the dead and the defeated, dust rising in their wake. The world ahead was wide and uncertain, but the air felt lighter with each step of the mare. The woman turned once to look back, then forward again, her jaw set with the resolve of someone who had crossed a threshold she would never return to. Gideon did not speak of what he had been. His silence said enough. The scar on his cheek was a pale line, but the deeper scar lived in the weight of every choice he made. He had sworn to lay down violence, but the frontier had its own commandments, written in dust and blood. Today he had answered them, not for himself, but for her. As they reached the rim, the sun lifted fully into the sky, casting long shadows behind them. The canyon looked smaller from above, just another fold in the endless land. But what had happened there would not vanish with distance. Already the story was taking root in the wind, ready to be carried to towns and ranches, to saloons where men leaned close to whisper of the scarred rancher who brought food instead of bullets, yet left a gang of outlaws broken in the dust. He kept his eyes on the horizon, steady, resolute. She leaned against him, her breath finally free of fear. And in that golden light, redemption and freedom rode side by side, bound not by chains but by the quiet promise of a dawn that belonged to them both.